Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are jumping right in to put on our historical detective hats. We're going to completely deconstruct a story you probably think you know like the back of your hand, the birth of Jesus. By digging into the original texts and some seriously fascinating linguistic clues, we're going to strip away centuries of holiday tradition and see what the sources actually say. Let's get started. Okay, let's dive into this. When you picture the nativity scene in your head, what do you see? You probably visualize this quiet, snowy night, right? A wooden stable, Mary and Joseph huddled around a feed box, some shepherds standing on one side, and three wise men, the Magi, standing on the other, all gazing at baby Jesus at the exact same time. But what if I told you that this specific image, as beautiful as it is literally a historical mashup? It's a composite image that you just won't find perfectly aligned in any single ancient text.
You see, our modern minds naturally combine the separate gospel accounts into one continuous, streamlined timeline. Step 1, they're in the stable. Step 2, baby Jesus goes in the manger. Step 3, the shepherds show up. And step 4, the Magi immediately arrive with their gifts. It makes for a wonderful, neat little holiday diorama. But the actual texts of Matthew and Luke, they tell two completely different stories, with totally different timelines and locations. And to figure out why, we need to look at the original Greek.
Section 1, the linguistic clue. Room at the inn? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that to understand the true setting of the story, we have to re-examine that extremely famous phrase, no room at the inn. In Luke chapter 2, verse 7, the Greek word used is katalima. For centuries, this has been translated as inn or some sort of lodging place. But in ancient Greek, katalima actually refers to a guest room or living quarters, usually inside a typical everyday family home. We've always pictured Joseph and Mary being coldly turned away by some grumpy innkeeper at a commercial hotel. But based on this word, it's highly likely Jesus was actually born in a crowded family home, maybe down on a lower level where the family's animals were brought in for the night, rather than a standalone commercial stable. Now you might be thinking, well, did they even have commercial inns back then? Oh, for sure, they absolutely did. And the author Luke knew exactly what word to use for them. Just a few chapters later, in Luke 10:34, during the famous story of the Good Samaritan, Luke uses the word pandikaion. This literally means a public place for receiving all comers, a true commercial inn. The fact that Luke intentionally used katalema for the birth narrative and pandikaion later on completely shifts our mental setting. It wasn't a fully booked-up hotel, it was a guest room. Section 2, the scene shift. From manger to house. So Luke gives us this very intimate, humble setting. But if we pivot over to Matthew's gospel, we see a stark contrast in the physical location. On one hand, you've got Luke's account. Mary placed him in a manger, literally a feeding trough for animals, which really emphasizes a space far away from ordinary comfort. But when we look at the arrival of the Magi in Matthew chapter 2, verse 11, it says, on coming to the house, they saw the child. Notice that. It doesn't say stable. It doesn't say manger. It explicitly says house. So did Luke and Matthew contradict each other? Actually, no. The mystery is totally solved when we look at the timeline.
Section 3, solving the timeline mystery. The Magi relate.
Here's the thing. Both physical settings are historically accurate to their respective texts, but they are separated by time. The Magi were actually quite late to the party. On night 1, which is strictly Luke's account, the birth happens, Jesus is placed in the manger, and the shepherds visit immediately. But Matthew's account with the Magi, that happens much, much later. The Magi see the star, they travel all the way from the east, and they arrive to find Jesus already living in an established house. This could have been months or, honestly, even up to 2 years later. And how do we know this? Because of a very dark historical event that Matthew records right after their visit.
So the crucial point is that Matthew 2:16 tells us, King Herod, who was absolutely terrified of a new rival king, carefully asked the Magi exactly when the star had first appeared. And based on that specific timeline, Herod ordered the tragic killing of all boys in Bethlehem who were 2 years old and younger. Think about it. If the Magi had visited on the exact night of Jesus' birth, Herod would have only targeted newborns. Actually, scratch that. He wouldn't have needed a 2-year window at all. His brutal order of a 2-year window absolutely proves that the Magi's arrival at the house happened long after that initial humble night in the manger.
Section 4, 2 portraits, 1 Jesus. The theological zoom out. Now that we've zoomed in on the historical details, we need to ask the big theological question. Why do Matthew and Luke tell such different stories?
And this brilliantly illustrates the answer. The writers weren't just throwing random facts onto a page. They were crafting highly specific portraits. Matthew's core theme is the royal Messiah. He focuses heavily on Joseph, the royal Magi, the looming threat of King Herod, and those famous royal gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to paint this majestic portrait of a king from David's line. Luke, on the flip side, focuses on the savior of the lowly. He emphasizes Mary, the humble shepherds, the manger, and the lack of a guest room to show a savior who brings good news to everyday marginalized people. I absolutely love this quote. Differences are not problems, they are clues. When we read ancient texts, it is so tempting to try and force them into one seamless modern narrative. But when we do that, we kind of erase the unique voices of the authors. These differing details, the manger versus the house, the shepherds versus the magi, they're not contradictions, no way. They are highly intentional choices by the authors to deliver their specific theological messages to their original audiences. Let's move to and see how this builds our understanding. When we stop trying to mash everything together into one simplified diorama, we actually get something much richer. Matthew shows us the king fulfilling ancient Old Testament prophecies, recognized by royalty from the East. Luke shows us the approachable savior, born in humble circumstances, welcomed first by the lowest class of society, the shepherds. Together, they don't contradict, they complement. They offer this amazing 3D, multifaceted view of the Nativity that is far deeper and more meaningful than a standard holiday greeting card. Which leaves us with this final thought. If you only had Matthew's perspective, you'd miss the manger entirely. If you only had Luke's, you'd miss the Magi. You literally need both distinct perspectives to see the whole picture. So how does this multifaceted view change how you read the story? The next time you encounter a familiar story, whether in history or in ancient texts, I really encourage you to read it with a fresh, investigative eye. Look for the clues, appreciate the differences, and keep asking questions. Thanks so much for joining me in this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.